You Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing your workplace can change your world, I got a real treat for you today. We are diving in on everybody's favorite topic, incentives. Beyond carrots and sticks, figuring out how incentives can drive better compliance. We're going to run through a couple of quick announcements. Like I say every single week, your network is your what? It's your net worth. So neither are big enough. Drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. If you're not taking advantage of this unique thing that we all have in this community, it's our greatest asset, then you're leaving a lot of influence and a lot of impact on the table. So you get, like I say, you get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. There's somebody on this episode today. There's somebody who's in this community who's solved whatever problem you are dealing with. So reach out, make a friend, be a friend, and build your network out. And if you don't have a LinkedIn, at least tell us where you're coming from today. We are giving away books because we love giving away books, and we're giving away CEUs, whether you're with SHRM or you're with CCB or who am I forgetting here? Yeah, HRCI. Hi, how's it going? You're going to get 3 credits for every single episode, and we're, of course, giving away books. Today, we're giving away my good friend Ron Carucci's book, To Be Honest. This is one of those books that's not just an ethics book. It's actually a great business book. It's like a 16-year longitudinal study on organizations that put ethics in the forefront and how those translated into better business results. So if you feel like your wheels are spinning on how to talk about the benefit of an ethical, culture inside your organization, this has some great tips. Let's get a massive emoji explosion as we get going. Nobody's had breakfast, nobody's had lunch. We're all just drinking coffee, and by everybody, of course, I mean me. Also, Compliance Week is right around the corner. So if you've never done anything for Compliance Week, now's your time to do something. You look at some of these Compliance Week programs out there, and they're very impressive. If you don't have anything in place, I just encourage you to do something to get started. Ethico put together a brand new toolkit for you. It's got a bunch of great stuff in it. It has games, activities, and resources. And so if you're planning your first Compliance Week or you're looking for some ideas to enhance the Compliance Week you have going, just go ahead and scan this QR code and download these assets for free because we love you. Also, because we love you so much, we have launched a brand new risk assessment tool. I'm talking about it a lot, and that is because it's getting so much traction. Our job is to make bets with our time. If you think about Parkinson's law, work fills the available time. And so it's not a question of, do I have enough to do? The question is, what of those things do we need to do? And it's hard to make those right bets with our time and our resources as everything kind of gets dumped on ethics and compliance, it seems. So I don't know where to put this here. I'll put this over here on this team. So as more things sort of fall onto our plate, we need to make better bets with our time, and we need data to validate those bets. And so when you have a risk assessment tool that's flexible, that allows for you to have data at your fingertips, you can reassess your work plan and move your risk assessment from a check-the-box exercise that's done once a year that doesn't drive any action to something that's a lot more nimble and a lot more fluid. So we put together our risk intelligence package. It's 25% off if you book a demo this quarter. You didn't even have to buy it this quarter. How do you like that? Book a demo this quarter and just see what all the fuss is about. Along with this risk intelligence package, you of course get the risk assessment tool, but you also get a bunch of these other things. We're really trying to move away from point solutions or like point platforms, point products, to what solution are you really trying to generate in your organization? You know what your business needs, you know what the risks of your organization are, and it's incumbent on you to have the right tools to, again, make the best bets with your time to drive that culture of integrity forward that ultimately enhances enterprise value and makes it a much better place to work. So also, round of applause for my guy here, the one and only Matt Kelly. If you have not read his blog recently, or you're not on his newsletter, I want you to do Control-T or Command-T, open up a new tab, go to Radical Compliance, and sign up for it. Constant genius, constant brilliance coming from the one and only Matt Kelly. They don't call him the coolest guy in compliance for nothing. All right. So once you're done, close that tab, come on back here, and I'm going to pass it over to Matt. Matt, you can give us the introductions, and we'll dive into this topic that I think all of us can do better with.
Sure. Thank you very much, Nick. And hello, everybody who is joining us this week. I do not pay Nick for the very kind support he gives for Radical Compliance. I always appreciate that.
Imagine what it would be if you paid. Imagine.
I do tell my kids that I'm the coolest guy in compliance. They don't believe me. They're not sure.
I vouch. I would vouch for that.
Issue of distinction there. This week, we are here to talk about incentives in compliance programs. And the regulators, the Justice Department and its guidelines for an effective compliance program, they talk a lot about incentives for good ethics and compliance. We're going to try and unpack what that means. How much is it structured incentives, like you give the senior VP a portion of their bonus tied to ethical behavior? Is that what it is? If it is, what does that even look like? Is it more soft incentives, encouraging people to speak up and behave ethically for the love of good behavior? If it's that, what does that look like? What works well, what does not, what works well for different populations in your company? We're looking to talk about all of that today, and we do have two great speakers with Nick and I today. So first is Christy Garcia. She is Vice President of Compliance at Saga Diagnostics, which makes medical tests for, I think, cancer treatments. Christy, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also with us is Samantha Kellen. She is Chief Compliance Officer at Stellar Health, which is a health technology company. And Sam has talked about incentives a lot over the years. Sam, thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, same here. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
And as always, for listeners, we are doing this to make sure that it is useful for you. So if you have questions you want to ask Samantha or Christy, feel free to pop those into the Q&A function. Or if you have comments that you want to pop them in and let us know what you're thinking, we are more than happy to work questions and comments and observations into the chat as we go on for the rest of the hour. But I'm going to start by seeing if Samantha, you first, and then Christy, if you could both just sort of define, what are we even talking about here? And Sam, I'll put it to you first. Like, what do the regulatory frameworks really say about incorporating incentives into the compliance program? Is it a structured thing? Is it a softer, let's all be good and that's wonderful thing? Is it both? What's your take on what the regulators are supposedly telling us?
Yeah, I mean, the good news about this is the regulators are telling us about this, right? Like a lot of our background and our foundation in compliance, we get what we're supposed to do directly from the regulators. And so there's 3 or 4 main frameworks that I think can be applicable to you as you're thinking through, what does this look like for my company? Overall, incentives should motivate the right behaviors. I think that's what they care most about is incentivizing folks to take the behaviors that you're looking for that are ultimately going to support your program. But they also shouldn't inadvertently incentivize the wrong ones, right? A really easy example of that is the Wells Fargo case study from a few years ago where folks were opening accounts for persons who were no longer living because there were really exciting and attractive bonuses for account creation. So you want to make sure that you're incentivizing the right behaviors, but not inadvertently incentivizing the wrong ones. And ultimately, they need to be tied to your business outcomes. You want ethical behavior that drives your strategy forward. The frameworks that I tend to look at are the 7 elements. The federal sentencing guidelines talk about incentives and disincentives, discipline. And there is some basic information there that ultimately says, not only should you worry about punishing people, you should also think about how you can drive the behavior you're looking for. The most recent DOJ guidance has been updated to ask some more specific questions and give us insight into what they think that should look like. And then on the healthcare side of the world, there's also the general compliance program guidance that HHS OIG put out a few years ago that also asks some specific things. And overall, I would say like the main takeaways that you want to think about as the introductory like 101 concept, you want them to be consistent and applied fairly across your organization. You want them to be customized and tailored to your organization and your culture. You need to maintain documentation about what you're doing, just like you would for every element of your program. It should ultimately, ideally, tie back to your risk assessment as well, so that you know, again, which behaviors you're trying to prevent or drive. And in order to do any of that, you're going to need to have really good relationships established with other folks across the business. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today as well.
Yeah. And so, Christy, now let me pivot to you and ask you the same sort of question about how we even get started to think about incentives, especially when, to Samantha's last point, we're not the only ones in the company thinking about incentives. HR has incentives that they try to roll out. Finance and business people have incentives that they're rolling out. And like there's a lot of incentives going on. And are we working with them? Do we compete against them? Is that a bad habit you want to avoid? Like, how do we even get started thinking about this?
Thank you, Matt. It's really important that we partner with the business stakeholders. HR, as you mentioned, finance, because you're going to have budget implications when you're looking at incentives. HR, there's going to be tax implications for incentives being reported as income for employees. So really, it's getting the buy-in of the business stakeholders. I've found that partnering with the compliance committee, where a lot of those stakeholders participate, is really a good way to go about it, and making sure that you're addressing their concerns, but also, to what Samantha said, pointing to what the regulators say as the reason for being able to do it, and hopefully get buy-in that way. If they see that organizations are encouraged to do it by regulators, especially those organizations that have previously had issues, it's easier to get that buy-in. But it's really important that they feel like they have a part to play in it.
All right. Nick, give me your thoughts here on how we should be thinking about incentives. And I struggle with, it's easier to have negative incentives to avoid bad behavior. I don't know that's really the best strategy, to have a nice, supportive corporate culture, but I still am not exactly sure what the right sort of positive incentives are for good behavior. How do you try and think this through?
So I just think that if you don't have any carrots, if it's just sticks, then, like without positive incentives, your program is really just a list of don'ts. And I don't think you can really build a sustainable, anti-fragile culture of integrity built on like negativity by itself. Mm-hmm. So, I think when we think incentives, we're always kind of naturally thinking about dollars and cents. And of course, that can be a part of it. But there are a lot of incentives. Praise is an incentive. Recognition is an incentive. Of course, working it into quarterly or annual reviews, I think can be great. That to Christy's point, that takes some partnership with other aspects or other departments inside the organization. But I think again, it kind of starts with a mindset. If our mindset is just kind of a list of don'ts, then it's going to be hard to kind of shoehorn in an incentive structure that maybe has the dimension necessary to actually change the behavior. But I mean, this is kind of table stakes. The DOJ's guidance is pretty explicit. OIG, is pretty creative about the use of incentives, whether it's, like I said, recognition programs, Easter eggs in trainings, things or in codes and things like that. I think if we can zoom out of incentives and recognize that that's just a mechanism to do what our mandate is, which is drive behavior and create the circumstances for a culture of integrity, then it can open our minds to, I think, be a little bit more creative around how these incentives can show up. Like even just a note in Slack or Teams about somebody or something, that's an incentive that I think we need to have in our repertoire.
Okay, so I, for now, want to stick with the idea of what compensation-based incentives look like and what form that should take. And that is something mentioned in the Justice Department guidelines. I don't remember word for word, but it is very clear that they are likely to ask, what are your incentives or compensation for senior executives to drive ethical behavior? So I'm still curious about, is that like a bonus percentage? If it's a bonus, based on what? How do we think that through? Because good behavior seems like it's a somewhat amorphous thing, pin a compensation number to it. But Samantha, let me put it to you first. How do we begin to do this? And we also should remember that we don't set compensation. HR would say that's our job, or senior business unit people would say that's our job. And here we are sneaking our interests into that. So what does that all look like?
Yeah, I think when you start talking about compensation, it does go in both directions, meaning you want to reward the positive behavior, but you also want to have mechanisms to potentially subtract compensation for the behaviors that you're not looking for, right? So if we just take compensation as a whole, the easiest way to get plugged into that process is through your existing performance review process. Assuming most companies have one these days, you're ultimately trying to reward good performance in this area or take away or have a negative component for behavior that you're not looking for. It could even just be like no action, such as you didn't drive completion of compliance training for your team, for an example. And so when I was building this out at my company, we are still pretty small. I reached out to our HR team and said, hey, this is something that is really important. I referenced the regulatory frameworks and said, how can we start to think about incorporating this, right? So I didn't come with a, like, we have to, or with a, like, we have to do it by this deadline. I sort of opened it up as just a conversation about, like, I'd love to explore a possibility here. I think when we're working with other business units, particularly HR, it's really important to not step on their toes or to not make it feel like a territory grab. And so just exploring the idea with them at first set the stage. And I also did it well in advance of an upcoming cycle so that we had time to figure it out and try to get it into a cycle if it was possible. And our performance review process here is really simple. It's 3 questions. It's what did your performance look like this year, i.e. what did you do to support your individual team and company goals? What do you want development to look like for next year? And then the third question we have is what did you do to support the compliance and privacy programs at our company?
Wow.
The third question is the one that I advocated for, right? So again, I fit it into how we do performance at Stellar already. It was adding one question to an already simple process. I didn't create a complex scorecard. I wasn't trying to make it this big thing. I kept it really simple. And right now, we don't have anything that says, well, depending on how you answer this question, it adds or subtracts to your compensation. I think that's coming. But what I really wanted to do was have an intentional conversation occur between managers and employees about how they supported the program that year and how they could do it going forward. And that, again, just like sort of sets the stage. I care actually more about the conversation, and then tying it to the compensation will come next. We've got some ideas about how to do that. But ideally, if the person writes back, well, I really didn't do anything, then that's data. That's a data point for the manager to think about how they score that individual and how that score then flows through to their bonus for that year.
Can I say a couple of things? Round of applause for Sam. How smart, playing that chess inside the organization. You started with like a how or a what question, as opposed to your point, imposing something. A how or a what question automatically makes my problem our problem. It's a problem for us to solve. And it's a very like unintrusive kind of a question. Also, I want to note that like it was 2 questions, now it's 3 questions. So you increased the questions by 50%. So any of us saying, oh my gosh, I don't think I'll be able to get a single question in, Sam was able to do that in the context of 2 questions. Like you said, it's a very simple question, but I think the nature of that question is really important. It wasn't a yes or no question. Did you support it or not? It was something like, what did you do to support it? And that allows for some commentary, and that gives you a lot of, albeit qualitative data to gather together and hear how these responses are coming. And you can start to cluster that around particular managers. Probably if a certain manager, again, like we need data to drive our decisions, to direct our efforts, because the to-do list is always longer than our arms. I just think it's absolutely brilliant the way that you did that. And this is how you get something started. Like, you're never going to wave a magic wand and then automatically 50% of everybody's compensation or bonus is tied to the extent to which they're reporting or whatever. It's a game of inches. It's a game of continuous improvement and incrementalism. And I think many times we get, we don't start the journey because we're like, I don't know what, step 8 is going to be. It's like, well, here's step 1. Just have a conversation. Here's step 2. Get one question in there, and then you can start getting some stuff, some information to kind of move it forward. Like my dad always said, one last thing. If you wait until all the lights going into town are green before you get off the porch, you're never going to leave your house. You have to just kind of get moving.
That's 1,000% right. And I'll just add that the following year, we were able to get plugged into our non-traditional sales compensation plan. So our compliance committee now reviews that each year to make sure that the incentives are reasonable and attainable, are going to drive the behavior that we want, but also have clawback provisions so that if we find they achieved their sales goals through inappropriate means, then we can claw back those dollars, right? So the performance review and starting the conversation was the first piece that gave us some traction. It gave us an MVP product to work with, and then we were able to advance on it over the years and start to get in some other points, some other touch points into the process.
So At some point, Sam, I'm going to circle back to ask a bit more about how all that worked in year two. But Christy, I want to pivot to you and ask you a little bit about the third leg of this triangle here. Compliance is one, HR is the other, but we also have the business unit folks who are also thinking just in pure business terms. I have incentives for goals I want to hit myself, so I'm going to put them in for my team. What is it like to work with those business unit types, whether they are salespeople or marketing or whoever else? But they also, I don't know that they're opposed to what we would say, but they might be wary about what we want, or I don't know. But how do you deal with them and win them over to your cause?
It's not a one size fits all. So it really is going to be dependent on what business unit, what the scope is, what actions they're performing on a daily basis, what the risk is there. Tying things to your risk assessment is really important. But when approaching them, it's really important that they feel like they understand your objective. They understand it's going to be based on clear metrics. One of the concerns that I hear business stakeholders over and over again say is it's very discretionary. I don't want there to be bias. I don't want there to be an implication that you're playing favorites. So it's making them feel that they're inclusive on determining who gets what awards. They may not have the final, decision, but I think making sure the business stakeholders feel like they're heard, they get input. That's really important. One of the things that we do with our sales individuals is to tie it to incentives, to their expense reporting, their HCP spend. Did they submit expenses that went over the meal thresholds that we set, that we have established so that we don't violate Stark or have any Stark issues? So it's making sure that you're tying it to each department's actions and day-to-day, so it's very relevant to them, and there are clear metrics that the business stakeholders feel like they were able to participate in determining.
Okay. That kind of gets to a question that I had been rolling around in my head for a few minutes. So, Samantha, I was listening to your preliminary approach of asking 3 questions and whatnot, and I was thinking, on one hand, those are good, sensible ways to get everybody comfortable with this idea. On the other hand, I thought something like, what have you done to support the compliance program? That's kind of subjective. And I wasn't sure how we go from subjective, qualitative data to more quantified, objective. You did this, therefore you get this much, or you didn't do this, we're going to claw back this much. And it's moving to the objective that might put people a little bit on the back foot about this. They're not comfortable with that. But I'm listening to you, Christy, about, okay, did you meet all of your expense report criteria? Have you submitted all the reports about dealing with physicians so we avoid a Stark Act issue or something like that? Like, that's objective criteria. And I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about how we do pivot from the subjective, what do you think of this idea, to the objective, this is what we've done, therefore you do get this or you don't get that. It's that latter part that I wonder about. How do we make that work? And, how do you figure that out? How do you get people to agree with it? I don't know if you two have any thoughts, and then Nick, you as well.
Well, I think it's really important, to my point, it's not a one size fits all. So it's a mix. We're very diverse in the incentives. It could be, I think Samantha mentioned training. So did you complete your compliance training? For the managers, did they assist in getting individuals to complete their compliance training? It also could be as simple as those that proactively reached out to compliance for guidance, encouraging that reporting and those touch points. So some of it can be a little discretionary, but having a good mix.
Yeah. And Sam, tell me a little bit more about how you said you went into, I think it was year 2 maybe, but you're bringing things to the compliance committee now to review, and what would a clawback look like? And can you just color in a bit more about how that works? Because that does sound like it's a bit more objective, criteria driven discussions around incentives, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road. How's that going to work, do you think?
Yeah, so some of it is sort of theoretical in the way you create your documentation, right? So our sales plan that gets provided out to each sales rep talks about what you need to do to meet these goals to earn these incentives. And the subjective part, or it really comes down to if there's an issue that comes up, right? What we leave it broad enough where we can say, well, you acted outside or in violation of our code of conduct, right? There's always a little bit of subjectivity there. But having the framework there, like, I do think it's pretty table stakes. So regulators will expect you to be able to recoup dollars if you find inappropriate behavior. That's the first part. They do actually ask, okay, so have you recouped any dollars, or have you taken action to decrease someone's compensation based on an issue? We're still pretty new and pretty small, so we don't have as much data to show for that. But I think for a larger company, they would be looking for an example of, yes, you've actually acted on it. So I think that's the second part that really matters. But moving the needle from that subjective to objective, again, is small steps. So we have this question now. We're asking our managers to evaluate their individual team members' support of the compliance program. And now the next phase is providing them back a report that says, well, Timmy, Bobby, and Susan haven't completed their compliance trainings on time this year. So that's a tangible metric that you can use to evaluate their performance, right? Other metrics around expense reporting or whatever, you start to just you give them the data, or you give them access to the data to be able to make objective assessments, so that it's not like, well, I just made sure we follow the rules. It's like, well, actually, here are demonstrable things that you could have done that you either did or didn't do. And that's like the baseline. Then you also are looking for things to reward on the positive side. So we had a PHI, and the security around PHI is really important at Stellar. We went around and noticed that a couple of our teammates that handle it most often had a little note on their monitors that, rather than writing their password, which is all of our main nightmare, it actually said, "Don't forget to encrypt." And so what we did was we called them out. We celebrated them as a compliance champion. We just loved that little idea. And instead of just recognizing them, we sponsored a team happy hour so that the entire team could be rewarded and benefit from their teammates' ethical conduct, right? So finding ways to drive leverage that way. We didn't just celebrate two people, we celebrated everyone. And that's one example. I know there's a lot of questions around, what do you do for small teams or teams that don't have a ton of budget? Trying to find ways to get the most bang for your buck out of your incentives will go a long way.
Okay. I mean, even if you're just sending that team lunch, if you can't afford a happy hour, doing something to recognize the whole group, driven by a positive exhibition of the behavior you want of a couple individuals in that group, can do a lot to help that group. All groups are trying to find some kind of an identity. It gives them something to sort of coalesce around and really kind of hang their hat on. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, look, people run toward compliments. People run toward positivity. They run toward appreciation or recognition. You know what I'm saying? Giving recognition. We've just had a lot of conversations like this, or I have, where people are like, I don't have the budget. Well, words are free, as you can tell. I subscribe to that. Like, words are free. You can recognize somebody very easily, and you can start to create that vibe to say, like, this is the type of behavior that I want to reinforce and see more of. There was somebody in a huddle at our company several years ago who raised their hand, and they said, they shared something that was kind of tough to hear as a leader. It was like where we were missing the mark. And that took a lot of courage for that person to raise their hand and like call that out. But what an opportunity that gave me to like call that out and acknowledge that as like in a representation of the values that I want everybody to have. And I did that multiple times over the years. And I think people just need to see an example of like what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. We're very good at showing what's out of bounds, but when there's stuff that's in bounds, we want to validate that and we want to reinforce that, because it's almost like there's almost a 10x benefit to it. And, it doesn't have to be expensive.
I love the point about sort of collective rewards, collective incentives. I think that is excellent. It is the mirror image of, I happened to the other day watch some snippets of that Vietnam movie Full Metal Jacket and Paris Island, the Marine Corps boot training, which was all about collective punishment for bad behavior. I would not necessarily advocate going the Full Metal Jacket route for incentives, but the mirror image of that would be what we are talking about. A few people do a good thing, the whole team gets rewarded. The other point that jumps out to me is for a lot of the objective criteria about, do you have privacy violations? Do you have expense reports that are timely or not? All of this depends on the line managers having access to the compliance data, which I am a fan of as much as you reasonably can. And I know internal audit thinks often, that's perfectly fine. They might be looking at financial processes that are happening out of whack. They build some sort of control to address it, and then they share that with the manager. So the manager gets to see when a financial process or a transaction is not going according to plan. This is the ethics and compliance version of that example. So a lot of this is just about sharing the right data. I wanted also to ask another question that I get a lot when we talk about incentives, where the line manager might step up and say, I'm not going to reward people for doing the right thing. That is supposed to be the table stakes. So why are we doing this? Would anybody care to knock that argument down? I don't know, Christy or Sam.
I will.
Oh, Nick, you can go first, and then I'd love to hear.
I mean, it's just so silly. It's such a silly position to me. Like, that's not how anything works.
You said it, Nick.
I mean, it's stupid. If you've ever had a dog, you just beat the dog only when it pees on the carpet. No, you reward it for doing the right things. You don't beat the dog at all. But you know what I'm saying. If you're raising a child, you're constantly putting positive incentives in place and encouragement and all those kinds of things. I think it's a very like low IQ, thoughtless way to think about how people actually work in the world.
I think if you think about year-end bonuses, right? Like most companies today set goals at the beginning of the year that your bonus attainment is tied to, right? And you're adding extra to their baseline salary to deliver on the results that you want. This is the very same concept. This is basic behavioral economics. And I agree. I think it's somewhat silly. You reward and incentivize the behavior you want. People don't just come to work to do their job like for free. It's driven by the desire to earn a paycheck. And this is the same thing. They're going to do the work that you want if you build the right incentive structures in place.
Okay.
And I think it's really important that you take any opportunity, and this is one opportunity to raise awareness of the compliance program. People love rewards. Yeah, people love rewards. So anytime you can raise awareness of the compliance program and then demonstrate to employees that the organization values what they have done, that they're committed to that culture of compliance and that ethical behavior. It's not just words in a code of conduct. I think so. That's what the incentives do as well, is really demonstrate that to regulators also.
Yeah. Christy, let me ask you a question about the incentives that might be handed out at different levels of the organization. And specifically, I guess, senior leaders, middle managers, and then rank and file employees. Are there certain incentives that would work for all of them? Are we really thinking more we tie the bonuses to the managers and we give, I don't know, free vacation to the lower level people? Is it both? Is it something else? How do you try and figure out which incentives are appropriate for various levels of the org chart?
Honestly, I haven't been able to tackle or break the senior manager or senior leadership level of incentives. But what we have been able to do is managers, when they are, again, proactively reaching out to compliance to partner on objectives and goals in their department, when those that are under their purview are submitting their expense reports on time, when they are able to catch issues on expense reports for their employees. So we have been able to get bonuses quarterly for managers when their folks act within the bounds of compliance and what those requirements are and controls are. For regular employees, again, a lot of it is praise, recognition, time off. We give employees time off. Each quarter, we have a compliance champion that we recognize in our newsletter. So it's small things like that. Again, it's going to be diverse depending on the level of the organization, the activities they're involved in, and the risk of those groups. But I have not been able to crack the senior leadership.
So admittedly, I haven't either, right? But I do want to just share an example that I heard at a conference once where a health system chief compliance officer was essentially able to build a compliance scorecard gate into the executive bonus structure. So in order for them to earn their year-end bonus, they had to achieve, say, 90%, like a score of 90% on their compliance scorecard for their area. So it would be things like we've been talking about, training completions, policy violations, things like that. And if they didn't get a 90, they didn't get any of their bonus. Now, I hold this out as like the creme de la creme of what we should all be aiming for. But again, if I had rolled into HR or my CEO's office and said, this is what I want to do, I would have been laughed out of the room, right? So you start small and you can work towards that. I think that's just an insane or incredible level of buy-in and support. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd been in trouble for something in the past. It's always easier to get buy-in after something big happens. But I just want to share that as one example I've heard about in my travels.
I suppose the thing that I struggle with here is we can come up with some fairly clear criteria for compliance-related behaviors, but that is not necessarily the same as criteria for ethics-related behaviors. And I'm thinking something like a senior manager who turns down a lucrative business opportunity because it smacks of corruption, and therefore I'm going to turn it down. And it's that sort of stuff that, even the guidance from the Justice Department that says, I have to quote here, prosecutors should examine whether a company has made compliance a significant metric for management bonuses. We could talk about compliance metrics such as proper filing of expense reports or getting your team to complete training, and I think that's important. But I don't know what the reward would be for saying I turned down a really lucrative deal because the other counterparty, they just didn't pass the smell test. And so that's where I kind of wonder, do we give them more? Do we give them less? Do we know what to do? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, or Nick, if you have any thoughts about this, but like it's that stuff that also I find to be, that's got to be problematic.
So I just think we have a lot of tools at our fingertips, right? Like there's been a massive democratization of software and, access and channels of communication that I think we sometimes use only in sort of the traditional way. I'm saying that in the context of this person. Like, I'm sure the compliance department would love to know about that. And they'd love to hold that person up as the sort of paragon of the ethical culture that they're trying to build, right? Like, that's a great thing to do. I find that people like that are high integrity, they're very low, or they're not sort of so prone usually to like shine a light on that because that's what they're supposed to do, and I think so let me just kind of tie this together. I've seen folks that do business with us utilize their intake channels in some creative ways that end up creating, again, stacking the deck in their favor and creating those circumstances for success, a way that someone can report somebody else, not for something bad, but rather for something good. Not report them for violating the code of conduct, but for going over and above the code of conduct. And now you have a little bit more, diversity in the type of risk intelligence that you're getting from the workforce that then creates circumstances for you to go back to that person's manager if that ends up coming through your hotline or through a reporting channel, or you're pulling these things out of the, stakeholder group as a function of a campaign that you're running or some kind of initiative. There are great things happening within your organization all the time. There are people, we tend to, get we overly sample the negative because things are going wrong and we're responding to fires. But like there could be a lot more fires, and there's a lot more people in your organization than you think that are living out your values in the way that you want. I think if you can open up some of those channels or repurpose some of those channels, and do a little quarter-long initiative to pull some of those stories out, it's going to create a lot more data points for you and give you a lot more sort of fodder to reinforce and like rebuild this fire of integrity that you want to kind of carry through your whole organization. So I think you got to just figure out a way to get more of those stories out. The reviews that Sam was talking about, that's a great way to start getting some great anecdotes and some qualitative information that you of course can run through an LLM and see what sort of some of those broader trends are. But I think engaging the stakeholders and shining a light on their friend or their coworker who's really exhibiting the values that your company espouses does a lot to, again, reinforce this thing that we're trying to build.
I would totally agree. I think it's about, I think I would probably can speak for Christy, like we would celebrate these the same ways that we're talking about if we knew about them.
Right.
So soliciting is really important. We use Slack. We're a Slack company. So for our compliance champion awards each year, we do solicit nominations from our senior and like our level below leadership team. So we're going out, we're saying, hey, tell us those stories so that we can celebrate them. We hear about them and we often nominate and select individuals ourselves, but we do go out and ask for nominations.
Brilliant.
Christy, let me ask you a question, because I know that in the past you have worked at businesses with integrity agreements of some kind. I am curious, just what do regulators ask about incentives if you are under an integrity agreement? Do they even ask at all? But in theory, here's another point from the Justice Department guidelines where they say, what percentage of executive comp is structured to encourage enduring ethical business objectives? So, I mean, like, are they really asking questions like that? Or I don't know, maybe who does participate in those conversations to figure out, is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it something else? But what's your experience been on issues like that?
So there's not specific language in a corporate integrity agreement, but being under a CIA, which I was at 2 organizations, what I found was as part of the requirements of our CIA, we had to bring in a board expert on compliance to perform audits for some of the reporting periods. And what they encouraged when they reviewed our compliance program was to not just be punitive, to be able to change the perception of compliance from adverse in policing the organization, to have more incentives. And one of the things that we were able to do is in our sales comp plans, be able to put those that violated were not eligible for bonuses. They were not eligible for promotions. They were not eligible for President's Club. For anyone that works with sales, that's a big deal for sales. So you can look at it as being punitive, but also it's an incentive for them to operate within the guidelines, to make sure that they're using and portraying ethical behavior. And the auditors that had come in as part of our corporate integrity agreement were really impressed that, to Sam's point, we were actually taking action to not only encourage individuals, but to discipline as well. So you have to be diverse.
Okay. Another question, I suppose, is who gets the authority to declare the incentive is met? Or how often might it wind up that the compliance, HR, and business leaders are at odds over whether a incentive has been met and therefore we should give it up, or no, it hasn't, we're not going to give it out, or this is a negative thing that we should punish somebody, no, we're not. Like, how do we make sure that those conversations, how often do they happen? How do we make sure they happen in a productive way instead of being at loggerheads? Sam, what would you say?
I love this question. I think there's this really comes down to that perennial challenge of compliance officers having influence and not authority. You need to be able to state your case, make recommendations, and ultimately like walk away or decide like, is this the hill I'm going to die on, right? So ideally, you do want something to refer back to, right? You want to be able to say, this salesperson violated the code of conduct in this way. The sales plan that we all agree to says X, Y, and Z will happen as a consequence. But we aren't the ones who get to decide. So I would ultimately recommend that it go back to the compliance committee, who, at least in our organization, is responsible for reviewing those sales plans. And then you ultimately have to have a conversation about it. You may not win the battle. We often don't win the battle. But if you've laid out the foundation that you can refer back to, you can point to why this matters, and you can make your case. And hopefully you've developed the relationships and the credibility over the time that you've been with your organization to get the buy-in and support that you need. But true disagreements, I really think, should go to the committee.
And I think what's important, if I can weigh in on that, is one of the things that I found is, again, compliance committee. Absolutely agree, Sam. That's really where we calibrate. We collaborate on, these are the folks that have been nominated. This is why, having those clear metrics you could point to. But one of the things that I found is I may not know what's happening on the other side. So I nominate someone that I feel is worthy of the integrity award for the year, but they may be having an HR issue. So it's making sure that those other business stakeholders can weigh in.
You know, that's an excellent point. I was curious how often other issues might cloud the conversation here. That, you know, for example, if we go through criteria for an integrity award, an incidence of sexual harassment is not going to be good. But that's not necessarily a compliance issue. It's more an HR issue. And I had wondered if there were some times where there's an incident that's happening that might affect an integrity award, but you don't get to see it because you're on the compliance side and it's more of an HR thing. So does that, Christy, to your point, does that happen often, do you think? Or how can you make sure that you get the full picture there?
It definitely happens. And that's why I think it's important that everyone is aligned when you're determining who gets these incentives. You don't have a full picture. And it did happen to me where we had someone that had performance issues. So even though it was very different criteria, they didn't think it would be a good look. And so to what Samantha said, you know, you have to determine, is it important enough for me to, you know, throw myself on the sword for this one?
All right. We have a bunch of questions from listeners. I'm going to try and get to some of them in the last 10 minutes or so here. One from Ramona saying, how do you eliminate the halo effect from supervisors? Nick, let me put it to you first because you are always good at understanding these things. I'm going to admit I'm not entirely sure what the halo effect is. So do you want to help us out, Nick or anybody else? But how do we make sure that we diffuse this?
So I think they're saying, how do you not? So the halo effect is, you know, the halo effect is when, you know, somebody gets sort of disproportionate, like, you know, you assume somebody's good. Like you on the Ethicsverse gives me the halo effect. Okay. So I'm kind of in your, I'm in your shine. Okay. So I think sometimes supervisors, just by their nature in the position, you know, in the organization, they get a certain halo effect as being viewed as, well, they must be responsible, they must be smart, otherwise they, you know, wouldn't be a supervisor. So I'm kind of surmising that's what they're talking about. I think one way to address it is have a slightly higher standard for that. Maybe, you know, you would need sort of a couple of pieces of kind of corroborating data or a couple of, you know, nominations from their subordinates or in their 360 review. You might need to see that to a greater degree than you would to give to somebody who's on the front lines. Without more context, that's how I'd answer that question. Kind of just have a little bit of a higher standard so you don't fall sort of victim to that sort of cognitive bias that we're all kind of subject to.
The other quick point I would add just is that giving them the data to make objective assessments, like we've been talking about, right? Like if you're able to say, well, yeah, Susie's great at her job, but Susie hasn't done her compliance training, like that's sort of irrefutable evidence. So anytime you can come with something tangible, I think that helps.
Here is a great question. how can businesses incorporate incentives and compliance goals with independent contractors, such as construction crews hired on a per contract basis? We have found that many of these folks don't feel any attachment to the company and therefore aren't motivated to pay attention to these goals. Okay, fair question. Any thoughts on how you could extend these sort of efforts to the independent contractors or third parties working on your behalf?
Well, we talked about corporate integrity agreements. Those independent contractors are oftentimes covered persons under that corporate integrity agreement. So they have to be held to account. They have to be required to complete compliance training. So while you may not be able to apply everything to those independent contractors, there's definitely incentives and other things that you can utilize, having them complete their compliance training, reporting and reaching out proactively to compliance. And that's when it's really important as well to work with the business stakeholders that oversee those contractors.
Sam, any thoughts along those lines about independent contractors?
Yeah, I think it just comes down. I mean, this is, again, very ambitious for folks who are early on in their third party management program. So I acknowledge that. But like being able to choose and work with vendors who have a shared vision for what it means to have a strong culture, whether it's a safety culture or a compliance culture, right? You may not be able to share the incentives down with contractors, but you want to work with companies who are doing the same thing that you are, right? That are ultimately incentivizing the behavior that you're looking for. So that can happen in your due diligence process. Again, it's a little pie in the sky, but you are also able to potentially enforce things through your contracts with them. So I would certainly look at what your contracts look like, or even your vendor or supplier code of conduct, if you have one. I think there are ways to trickle some of that down. It just isn't as direct or easy.
But also, you can use that internally. You can put that on your Slack channel. Wow, this vendor that we're doing business with is really living up to our values. Like, it's just singing praises to reinforce the behaviors that we want to see, and it doesn't just have to be within the organization. There's myriad examples around us, whether they're stakeholders connected, like third parties, whatever. Whether they're stories in the paper, like there's, if people still read papers, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's all this data around us that we can hold up as an example that we want people to emulate. And I think the more of that we do, the more serious people take the words that we, say. The values that we're pushing in the organization, are they just platitudes? Are they just words on the wall? Or are they actually animating? Are they actually something that we actually care about? And I think more examples of that, the better.
So we had a couple of different related questions also about A, working with extremely small teams, or B, working with not much budget support. And what are the sort of incentives we could use there? Sam, let me kick that question over to you, because I know you had mentioned before, like, I think you called them Easter eggs that you sprinkle around as people are doing compliance training or whatnot. Tell us a little bit more about how might that work at the very small level.
Yeah. So when I started our compliance program at Stellar and launching policies and trainings for the first time, I buried Easter eggs in our communications or our announcements. So, halfway through it would say something like, hey, if you've read this far, click here and to answer a question and be entered for a raffle for a gift card. So they're $25 gift cards. They're not huge. But once I started burying things, folks would pay more attention. They would read through them. They would be excited to enter the raffles. We also do that now for like the first 25 to complete a training would be entered into a raffle, things like that. But honestly, our biggest success has come through the game shows that we play at our annual company retreat. We used to sponsor some swag, like a blanket or a backpack or a magnet or something. And in the last year, we've converted that over to high value prizes for our game show. So we do our training in August, and then in September, we go to our company retreat where we play either like a bar trivia or a Jeopardy game where teams compete to answer compliance, privacy, security related questions. And the teams that win like $400 or $500 prizes. but
Cool.
it adds up to say a couple of $1,000s total. But the excitement we get all year, what are the prizes going to be this year? What are we going to play? This year we were able to reinforce, hey, do your compliance training, pay attention to your compliance training, because some of those topics are going to pop up in the questions for our game. It really got people more excited. So moving away from like insignificant swag for everyone to these higher value prizes really moved the needle for us a lot, as far as getting engagement and excitement, and also making our team seem like a fun team, which is also another challenge to overcome. And then those CRISP commitment awards also win some prizes, or get to choose from a prize for their award. We also make sure that those get announced and handed out by our CEO. It's not me. So again, reinforcing that this is something that matters to the company. But also all of the things that we've talked about, like recognition, thank yous. You could do lunches with an executive or the CEO. Some people just want FaceTime. There's also been talk in the comments, I know, about what do you do for people who don't want any recognition? It's always nice to check in with folks and say, do you want a public award ceremony, or would you just like an attaboy and a thank you note from the CEO, right? Checking in and figuring out how people would prefer to be recognized is always helpful if you can do that.
That's smart.
Sam, you mentioned the CRISP awards. Is CRISP an acronym for something? Like, what does that mean?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So at Stellar, I have a broader team than your average chief compliance officer. We have compliance, IT, DevOps, security, privacy, and legal all on the same team. So it's an acronym for all of the teams that report up into our umbrella.
Okay. Christy, do you have any advice along these lines about small teams, small budgets, how you can have maximum impact? What would your advice be?
Yeah, you have to start small. We've talked about over and over again how recognition, praise, that's free, it doesn't cost. I utilize and put money in my compliance week budget for integrity awards, which we give annual integrity awards. And it's under $1,000, to get these nice crystal engraved awards. We also do the daily raffles. So we launch compliance micro learnings, and we put in everyone that completes it within the first week is eligible for a $25 gift card. So it's making sure that you also have all those little small things that aren't going to really break the budget.
All right. Well, we are pretty much out of time now, but Christy Garcia from Saga Diagnostics, Samantha Kellen from Stellar Health, both of you have given us so much information. This has been a great session. Thank you very much. And Nick, I will leave it to you for any closing comments or whatever we have coming up in the next couple of weeks. But this has been a great session. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get a massive emoji explosion. We're almost at 5,000. I'm shocked that you're not giving us the incentives we need to keep this conversation going. So let's see if we can blast through it. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much, Christy. Of course, Matt, phenomenal. Next week, we have another great episode for you. We are talking about turning risk assessments into strategic clarity. How do you use risk in your organization as a strategic lever to drive more impact? That is the name of our game. We're never going to eliminate all the risk in our organization, but it's incumbent on us to show up as business people, to show up as executives first, and really kind of connect our activities, our initiatives to the objectives of the organization. So we have the one and only Jisha Diamond coming on. If you don't know her, she's absolutely brilliant. And we're going to have all of your favorite things. We might make it a spooky Halloween episode. We haven't decided yet. So love you all. Thank you all for coming. Download that Compliance Week toolkit. I think you're really going to love it. And please share some feedback with us. We're going to be opening up some channels to recommend other speakers. We're going to be opening up some channels to get some more feedback on how we can add some more value in the Ethicsverse. We take very seriously the hour or two that you spend with us each week on the show. We want this to be a value add for you and give you a new perspective on how you can drive your program forward, how you can build your network out, and how you can increase your influence in your organization. So we are always all ears. And if you love the Ethicsverse, we recently, one more round of applause for the Ethicsverse team. We recently broke 1,000 attendees a week or so ago. 1,000 attendees in a week. So that's a goal we've been running at. When we started this thing, it was like 30 or 40 of us hanging out. So for all you OGs, look at where we came. Look at where we're at. But we would love if you could help share the word, invite your team, share your best takeaways from the Ethicsverse. And we just want to keep growing this community, because I truly believe if we can fix our workplaces, we can fix our world. When we love our work and we love our workplace, we can generate the kind of culture that leads to all those positive externalities that makes everybody's life a lot better. So thank you all for coming. Subscribe to, of course, Radical Compliance. If you haven't done that yet, now is your time. We're going to give you a couple of seconds back, but we will see you all next week. Take care.
Thank you.